Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Thucydides Peloponnesian War. Again, we're using the Crawley translation and landmark Thucydides. I can give you a copy here. We're talking the Google edition, Google Books edition, what you see on the screen. Um, and we're going to be doing today the 12th year of the war, both winter and summer, because it's so small. It's from chapter 39 to chapter 51 of the book 5 of the, the history of the Peloponnesian War. Uh, now, what's so significant of this is we talked about the break. There's been a break. Uh, a year in year 10, there was a conclusion of a treaty because the Spartans wanted their soldiers back. That the British Athenians captured in the battle on the island, and that this large contingent of soldiers contained many of the leading citizens in Sparta. So they were under a very good pressure, um, and that after the only thing that didn't really lead to a quick suppress was at first the Athenians were getting better, but then what happened? Bratus is in the Argive areas, in the Thracian areas, were doing so was basically achieved. They captured Apipolis, which was a major Athenian colony or territory, and particularly that's where their silver was. And this was a significant loss for the Athenians in that sense. And this led them to ultimately to negotiate. Brathius is dead, and Cleon's death both led to the two of the most warlike of the parties um, dying, and this led to the possibility of Nicias to kind of lead into a peace, get a peace agreement, which they established. But we see right last in the year 11 that the Spartans are kind of like, they're not willing to force the Corinthians and the other allies who didn't really like the treaty to abide by the treaty. So the Spartans are kind of not really, they don't really want to they don't want to use force against the Corinthians, their fellow Peloponnesian ally. The Corinthians and many of the other allies did not like. I mean, not all of them. The majority went with Sparta to accept the peace, but a significant number of them following our guy. Then went to Argos, the Argives, a Peloponnesian city near, kind of, if you look at the map, there. Uh, it's in the Peloponnesus. It's close to it. Make going to war with Sparta. If they enjoyed in with this, they would be a kind of more effective against Athens. It'd be a powerful enemy against Athens. But uh, this is what we see how this Spartans new boat Ephors got elected, and the new Ephors were kind of against treaty. The previous treaty was signed by the original those other Ephors. Now the new people coming in power didn't like the treaty, and therefore started to work kind of convince make peace with the allies that didn't. Now, this is where we left off. Where starting chapter 39, um, which deals with um, 39 ends the last chapter in that sense. And we start with 50. That's what we go. 50, not 50, 40. Sorry, 40. And this is where it is. In the first days, in the first days of the following summer, the Argives, seeing that the promised ambassadors from Boeotia had not arrived, and that Pactium was being demolished, and that a separate alliance had been concluded between the Boeotians and the Spartans, began to be afraid that Argos might be left isolated, and all her allies would go over to Sparta. They supposed that the Boeotians had persuaded by the Spartans to raise Practium and enter into a treaty with the Athenians, and that Athens was privy to this arrangement. So that an alliance with Athens would no longer be open to her. This was a recourse which she had always counted upon by reason of the existing tensions if her treaty with Sparta were not maintained. On this crisis, the Argives, afraid that as the result of refusing to renew their treaty with Sparta and aspiring to the supremacy of the Peloponnesian, they would at the same time be at war with Sparta, Tegians, Boeotians, and Athenians, now hastily sent off Epuus and Arson, who seemed the persons most likely to be acceptable as envoys of Sparta, with the goal of making as good a treaty as they could with the Spartans, upon such terms as could be obtained, and of offering and of being left in peace. Having reached Sparta, the ambassadors proceeded to negotiate the terms proposed of the proposed treaties. When the Argives first demanded was that they might be allowed to refer to the arbitration of some cities or private persons the questions of the Korean land, a piece of frontier territory about which they had always been disputing, which contains the cities of Thurii and Endia, and which were occupied by the Spartans. The Spartans at first said that they could not allow this point to be discussed, but were ready to conclude upon the old terms. Eventually, however, the Argive ambassadors succeeded in obtaining from them this concession. For the present, there would be a truce for 50 years, but it should be competent. But it should be competent for either party, there being neither plague nor war in Sparta or Argos, to give a formal challenge and decide the question of this territory by battle, on as on former occasions when both sides claimed the victory. Pursuit not being allowed beyond the frontiers of Argos or Sparta. The Spartans at first thought this was mere folly, but at last, anxious at any cost to have the friendship of Argos, they have agreed to the terms demanded and committed them to writing. However, before any of this could become binding, the ambassadors were to return to Argos and communicate with the people, and in the event of their approval, to come at the feast of the Heraclean and take the oaths. The envoys returned accordingly. In the meantime, the Argives were engaged with negotiations. The Spartan ambassador, um, Andromedes, Phaedimus, and Antimendeus, who were to receive the prisoners from the Boeotians and restored them and Practium to the Athenians, found that the Boeotians had themselves raised Panactum, and upon the plea that oaths had been anciently exchanged between their people and the Athenians, after a dispute on the subject, to the effect that neither should inhabit the place, but that they should graze it in common, as the Athenians, as for the Athenian prisoners of war in the hands of the Boeotians, these were delivered over to the Andromenes and his colleagues, and by them conveyed to Athens and given back. The envoys at the same time announced the raising of Panactium, which to them seemed as good as a restitution, as it would no longer lodge any enemy, lodge an enemy in Athens. This announcement was received with great indignation by the Athenians, who thought that the Spartans had played them false, both in the matter of the demolition of Panactum, which ought to have been restored to them standing, and having, as they have now heard, made a separate alliance with the Bottians, in spite of their previous promise to join Athens in compelling the adherence of those who refused to accede to the treaty. The Athenians also considered the other points on which Sparta had failed her in her compact, and thinking they had been deceived, gave an angry answer to the ambassadors and sent them away. The breach between Sparta and Athens having gone thus far, the party of Athens wished to cancel the treaty immediately, put themselves in motion. Foremost amongst them was Alcibiades, son of Cleinias, a man still young in years for any other Hellenistic city, but distinguished by the splendor of his ancestry. Alcibiades thought the Argive alliance really preferable, not that a personal peck, okay, PQ, I can't, that's an old word, peck, had not also a great deal to do with his opposition. He being offended with the Spartans for having negotiated the treaty through Nicias and Laches, and having overlooked him on the council of his youth, and also for not having shown him the respect due to the ancient constitution of his family, connection of his family with them as their protexi, which renounced by his grandfather, he had himself recently attempted to renew by his attentions to their prisoners taken in the island. Being thus, as he thought, slighted by all, he had in the first instance spoken against the treaty, saying that the Spartans were not to be trusted, but that they only negotiated in order to enable by this means to crush Argos, and afterwards to attack Athens alone, and immediately agreed upon the occurrence of and now immediately upon the occurrence of this breach had sent privately to the Argives, telling them to come as quickly as possible to Athens, accompanied by the Menetians and Lycians, with a proposal of alliance, as the moment was propitious, and that he himself would do all he could to help. Upon receiving this message and discovering that the Athenians, far from being privy to the Boeotian alliance, were involved in a serious quarrel with the Spartans, the Argives paid no further attention to the embassy which they had sent to Sparta on the subject of the treaty, and began to incline rather towards the Athenians, reflecting that in event of war they would rather have on their side a city that was not only an ancient ally of Argos, but a sister democracy and very powerful in sea. They accordingly at once sent ambassadors to Athens to negotiate uh, uh, um, for alliance, accompanied by each other from Elis and Melitia. At the same time, an embassy consisting of persons reputed to be well disposed towards the Athenians, Theocriden, Leon, and Endos, arrived in haste from Sparta out of fear that the Athenians, in their irritation, might conclude an alliance with the Argives. They also intended to ask for return of Pylos in exchange for Panactium, and to defend this alliance with the Boeotians by pleading that it had not been made to hurt the Athenians. When the envoys spoke in the council upon these points, stating that they had come with full power to other settle all the others at issue between them, Alcibiades became afraid that if they were to repeat these statements to the popular assembly, they might gain the support of the multitude and cause the Argive alliance to be rejected. So he resorted to the following stratagem. He persuaded the Spartans by the solemn assurance that if they would say nothing of their full power in the assembly, he would give back Pylos to them, himself the present opponent of its restitution, engaging to obtain this from the Athenians. He would settle the other points on issue. His plan was to detach them from Nicias and to disgrace them before the people, as being without sincerity of their intentions, or even common consistency with their language. And so to get the Argives, the Aegeans, and Mantians taken into alliance. This plan proved successful. When the envoys appeared before the people, and upon the question being put to them, as they did not say that they had said in the council, they had come with full powers. The Athenians lost all patience, and carried away by Alcibiades, who thundered more loudly than ever against the Spartans, were ready instantly to introduce the Argives and their companions to take them into alliance. An earthquake, however, occurring before anything definite had been done, and the assembly was adjourned. Earthquake adjourns the assembly. As the assembly held the next day, Nicias, in spite of the Spartans having been deceived themselves, had been deceived themselves, and having also allowed him to be deceived and not admitting that they had come in with full powers, still maintained that it was best to be friends with the Spartans. He argued that they should postpone all actions on Argive proposal and send once more to Sparta and to learn her intentions. The postponement of the war could only increase their own prestige and injure that of their rival. The excellent conditions or state of their affairs, making it in their interest to preserve this prosperity as long as possible, while the affairs of the Spartans were so desperate that the sooner she could try her fortune again, the better. He succeeded accordingly in persuading them to send ambassadors, himself being among them, to invite the Spartans, if they were really sincere, to restore Panactium intact with Amphipolis, and to abandon their alliance with the Bottians, unless they consented to accede to the treaty. In agreement with the stipulation, which forbade either party to negotiate without the other, the ambassadors were instructed to say that the Athenians, had they wished to play false, might already have made an alliance with Argive, who had indeed come to Athens for that very purpose, and they went off furnished with instructions as any other complaints that Athens had to make, that the Athenians had to make. Having reached Sparta, they communicated their instructions and concluded by telling the Spartans that unless they gave up their alliance with the Bottians, should the latter refuse to accept the treaty, the Athenians, for their part, would ally themselves with their Argives and their friends. The Spartans, however, refused to give up the Bottian allies. The party of Xerxes, Xanarches, the Ephor, and others who shared their view, carrying the day upon this point, but renewed the oath at the request of Nicias, who feared to return without having accomplished anything and to be disgraced, and as was to be indeed his fate. He was being held the author of the treaty with Sparta. When he returned, the Athenians heard that nothing had been done at Sparta. They flew into a rage and decided that faith had not been kept with them, took advantage of the presence of the Argives and their allies who had been induced by Alcibiades, and made a treaty and alliance with them on the following terms. And now this is this is on chapter. I think this is. Yeah, this is chapter 47. The Athenians, Argives, Mantians, Eleans, acting upon themselves and their allies in the respective empires, hegemonies, I think the word is, made a treaty for 100 years to be without fraud or injury by land or by sea. It shall not be lawful to carry on war either for the Argives or the Mantians and their allies against the Athenians, or their allies in the Athenian Empire, or for the Athenians and their allies against Argives, Eleans, Mantians, and their allies in any way or any means whatsoever. The Athenians, Argives, Eleans, and Mantians shall be allies for 100 years upon the following terms. If any enemy invades the country of Athens, Argives and legions, Menatians shall go to relieve Athens according as the Athenians may require by message. In such way, they may most effectively can to the best of their power. But if the invaders be gone after plundering the territories, the offending city shall be the enemy of the Argives, Mediterraneans, and Athenians, and shall be made, and war shall be made against it by all these cities, and no one of the cities shall be able to make peace with that city except all the above cities agree to do so. Likewise, the Athenians shall go to the relief of Argos, Metia, and if the enemy invade their country of Elos and Menati and Argos, according as the above cities may require by message, in such a way as they most effectively can, and to the best of their power. But if the invader is gone after plundering the territory, the city offending shall be the enemy of the Athenians and Argives and Mantians, and war shall be made against all these cities, and peace shall not be made with that city except all the above cities agreeing to it. No armed force shall be allowed to pass for hostile purposes to the country of their power contracting, or of the alliance in their respective hegemonies, or to go by sea except all the cities, that is to say, Athens, Argos, Menati, and Elis, vote for each such passage. The relieving troops shall be maintained by the city, sending them for 30 days from their arrival in the city that has required them, and upon their return in the same way, if their services be desired for a longer period, the city that sent them shall maintain them at the rate of 3 Egerian obols per day for heavy armed soldier, archer, or light soldier, and a Aenegian drachmas for cavalry. Um, the city sending the troops shall have command when the war is in their own country, but in the case of the cities resolving upon a joint expedition, the command shall be divided among all the cities. The treaty shall be sworn to by the Athenians for themselves, and their allies by the Argives, the Meteans, and Athenians, and their allies by each city individually. Each shall swear an oath most binding in his own country over full-grown victims. The oath being, and as follow: I shall stand by my allies in this articles, justly, innocently, and sincerely, and I will not transgress the same in any way or means whatsoever. The oath being taken at Athens by the consuls and the magistrates, the praetonians administering it, and at Argos by the consul, the aedi, and the artina and the aedies administering it, and the Manatians by the demergai and the consul, and the others, the magistrates, the theori and the polymarchs administering it. At the Elis by the demiurga, the magistrates and the 600, and the demiurge and the Theoplactiates administering it. The oath shall be renewed by the Athenians going to Elos, Manticean, and Argos 30 days before the Olympic Games, by the Argives, Mantians, Elishas going to Athens 10 days before the feast of the great Pan and Lanthea, Athenae. The articles of the treaty, the oaths, the alliance shall be inscribed on a stone pillar by the Athenians in the Acropolis, and by the Argives in the Agora in the temple of Apollo, and by the Manatians in the temple of Zeus in the Agora, and the bronze pillar shall be erected jointly by them at the Olympic Games now in hand. Should the above cities see fit to make any additions to these articles, whatever all the above cities shall agree upon after consulting together shall be binding. Although the treaty and alliance were thus concluded, still the treaty between the Spartans and Athenians was not renounced by either party. Meanwhile, Corinth, though ally of the Argives, did not accede to the new treaty any more than she had done to the defensive and offensive alliance formed before this between the Eleans, Argives, and Mantians, when she declared herself content with the first alliance, which was only defensive and which bound each of them to help each other, but not to join the attacking army. The Corinthians thus stood aloof from their allies, and again turned their thoughts towards Sparta. Chapter 59. This is the summer 12th year at the Olympic Games, which were held this summer, and in which the Arcadian Androestinus was victor for the first time in the wrestling and boxing, and the Spartans were excluded from the temple by the Eleans and thus prevented from sacrificing or contending for having refused to pay the fine specified in the Olympic law imposed upon them by the Elations, who alleged that they had attacked Fort Procurus Phycilus and sent some of their hoplites into Leperum during the Olympic truce. The amount of the fine was 1,000 minae, two for each hoplite, as the law prescribed. The Spartans sent envoys and pleaded that the penalty was unjust, saying that the truce had not been proclaimed had not yet been proclaimed at Sparta when the hoplites were sent off. But the Eleans affirmed that the armistice with them had already begun and proclaimed it first among themselves, and that the aggression of the Spartans had taken them by surprise while they were living quietly in a time of peace and not expecting anything. The Spartans responded that the Elysians really believed Sparta had committed an aggression. They would not have subsequently proclaimed the truce at Sparta, but they had proclaimed it notwithstanding, as if they had believed nothing of the kind, and received the proclamation. The Spartans had made no attack upon their country. Nevertheless, the Elysians adhered to what they had said, and nothing would persuade them that the aggression had not been commenced. And if however, Sparta would restore Leperbium, they would give up their own share of the money and pay that of the gods for them. This proposal was not accepted. The Eleans tried a second instead of restoring Leperbium. If this was objected, the Spartans should ascend to the altar of the Apollon Zeus, as they were so anxious to have access to the temple, and swear before the Hellenes that they would surely pay the fine at a later day. This was also being refused. The Spartans were excluded from the temple, the sacrifice, the games, and sacrificed at home. The Leprians, being the only other Hellenes who did not attend. Still, the Eleans were afraid that the Spartans would sacrifice by force, and kept guards with a heavily armed company of young men, being also joined by 1,000 Argives, and the same number of Mantians, and some Athenian cavalry stayed in Hypatia during the feast. Great fears were felt in the assembly of the Spartan coming in arms, especially after Lytius, son of Aresculus, a Spartan, had been whipped on the course by the umpire because upon his horse being the winner, and the Boeotian people had proclaimed the victor on account of his having no right to enter. He came forward on the horse and crowned the chariot in order to show that the chariot was his. After the incident, all were more afraid than ever and expected a disturbance from Sparta. The Spartans, however, kept quiet and let the feast pass. As we have seen, after the Olympic Games, the archives and the allies repaired to Corinth to invite her to come over to them. They found some Spartan envoys, and a long discussion ensued, after which all ended in nothing because an earthquake occurred, and they all dispersed to their homes. Summer was now over. During the following winter, a battle took place between the Helo, uh, Her- Heracla, um, Heraclius and Trachmia, and the okay, this is Anamians, uh, Dolopians, Malians, and a certain this and certain of the Thessalians, all tribes bordering on and hostile to the city, which directly menaced their country. Accordingly, after having opposed and harassed it from the very foundation of every means of their power, they now in this land defeated the Heraclots, Zaxi, son of Clinus, their Spartan commander, being among the slain. Thus, the winter ended, and the 12th year of this war ended also. So, and that's the chapter 51, and we end here. So that this will stop here at the 12th year of the war. Is it 11? Let's make sure. Yeah, 12th year of the war. If you have any comments, please put them below, and comments or questions or things you'd like to ask. Um, um, the Olympic Games was an interesting thing today. This thing. And the way the politics of, entered the games. Um, if you like what we've done here, like, share on social media and share the means. Get a friend to join, subscribe. If you want to help, you can follow me on social media that's listed below. If you wish to contribute something to help in the continuation of what I'm trying to do here, I'll be honest, I'm gonna be trying to do some book reviews to do this. I've been kind of ill, so this new bug, not the monkeypox, but post-COVID kind of allergy, flu that stuck for like almost 3 weeks. So it's been that's why my voice is kind of hoarse. Um, yeah, it's been difficult a little bit, and I've been trying to get some work done on my writing. I sent some articles out for possible publication, so I've been busy. Um, and I hope to get some more stuff done. So that's why support is useful, so I can do these things. Starting October, I teach again, so it's a couple weeks away for you guys. But I will still be doing these things. I'll make these things. I like to finish this as possible. Well, with that, I will let you go. Take care. Have a